What's up, guys? Gonna bring you a video on how to wire accessories to your ATV. This video is from Matt Reed. You asked how I did my wiring and switches and whatnot, so I'm gonna go ahead and show you some of the tools I use, where I put the switches, how I put the switches, and how to do it. I think that's the last part. All right, let's get into it. Alright, so if you're wanting to know how I ran my wires and how I wired them on the bike, I'm going to show you that now. If you're wanting to know how to crimp and do all the wiring and stuff, I'm going to show you that after I show you how I ran my wires. So let's start off with how I ran my wires. Okay, first you're going to take and run a ground wire and a positive wire down under through the plastics behind here, which you can't see, but just take your side plastic off and zip tie it to something that doesn't move or could damage it, like the shifter. It runs through. The shifter runs through here, so you're going to want to be in front of it or behind it, but you don't want to be on it because it moves back and forth and you don't want your wires moving back and forth. So then I ran them up through here. I have a lot of old wires here because, you know, I just go riding and enjoy riding, but the setup's actually sound. It just looks like a mess right now because I keep splitting off to add new things or other things, and eventually, if you do it all at once, it'll come out clean. If you do it as you go, it'll end up looking like this. And you could bunch this all up and zip tie it, but when I put it up there, it just pulls the leads off because it's too tight. So I just leave it loose and bundled up slack in case I need to remove that. So there's my switches. They got caps so they don't get no sparkies, and it's kind of a mess, but you don't see any of that when it's away, and you can do yours way cleaner than I've done mine. And I just kind of have my switches like this so I can, that should be rock lights. Yeah, all right. That's the switch to my radio, so I can turn it on, turn it off. This is light bar. And this is the winch, so you can use the winch. Alright, so the wires, I'll just give you an example because you pretty much just run them and hide them from things. So right there you can see the wires going to my light bar, and the wire from the light bar comes off the back. I routed it down and in through the hood here, so you don't really notice it from the front, but I just kind of ran it through there. And then I connected my wires to the wires it came with, ran them up over the post here that the shock's attached to because nothing will hurt it, and then ran it up and then alongside some of my vent lines and just zip tied it to accordingly all the way back and back up through here. So now let's go over how to wire and what you're going to need. That's how I ran my wires. That's what my switches look like. Now I'm going to show you how to do that. So in order to do this kind of stuff, you don't absolutely need everything here, but this is how to do it the nice way. First up, you're going to need a drill and a big drill bit, or a 3/4 inch little hole bit, or hole dozer. Okay, you just need a 3/4 inch hole dozer. You don't need a hole dozer, you just need a 3/4 inch drill bit hole saw attachment. Some wire strippers, nice wire cutters, and then this badass crimping tool will make your life a lot easier if you have it. Then all the connectors that go and are used with that badass crimping tool, so they'll cover the leads so you don't have any fires or arcing or any of that crazy nonsense. And I would highly recommend these solder-filled heat shrink with glue butt connectors. You never have enough butt connectors, I swear. And what they are is they have heat shrink on the outsides and solder on the inside, so it melts and solders the wires together for you. Extremely nice, makes a really good connection, makes them watertight. I always run speaker wire because that's just how I've always been. So 14 gauge. Make sure you get a nice thick one. Thick as in the coating around it. 14 gauge is pretty thick and it's decent enough to run pretty much whatever you're going to run on these. And yeah, so 14 gauge speaker wire. That's what I use for my wires. Some sort of 3-prong toggle switch. Make sure if it's going on your ATV, buy a waterproof one. This is non-waterproof. This will last 1 to 2 rides and short itself out. These ones are waterproof, and you can tell because they have that boot on them. Not that that really keeps water out, but they've lasted me many rides, and I was replacing these like every ride. So don't buy these cheap ones. But I am gonna use these cheap ones for the demonstration. And a heat gun, lighter, torch, something to heat the heat shrink with. I have a little light strip here because it's all I have is an accessory to show you how this is gonna go. I have a little test battery there, and I have this giant plastic piece of shit that we're gonna pretend is our 4-wheeler. So the first thing you're gonna do is pick a nice spot to drill your hole. Once you've picked a nice spot to drill your hole, take your hole bit, stick it in your drill, tighten her up, and drill you a hole. So now we got a nice clean hole in the plastic. And your switch will have these little tabs on them. So those side tabs are what's going to lock it in. So it should push in and then click in. And these 2 side tabs that are on my fingers will hold it in. So you don't want to push it in there right away, because if you do, you're going to have to compress these, squeeze these tight just to get it back out. So let's get to wiring things up. So set your switch aside for now. First thing I do is I install the accessory. So let's go ahead and install our little light strip here. Man, she's looking good. I probably should have tested this light strip to make sure it works beforehand, and that's something you should do with all devices before you do all the hard work. But I think that's a fucking mint light strip there. So we got our wires here, and just for making things clean, we'll go ahead and run our wires through the back of this, just to show off the build quality here, I guess. Looks like heat shrink. Alright, whatever. It's through the back. So, now we got our tiny little wires there. And what we're going to do is, because these are so tiny, these little LEDs, I'm going to strip a ton of the material off. Probably hard to see. Oh, it's not focusing. I'm going to strip a ton of the material off because these are so thin. I don't even know what gauge these are. Alright, so now what I'm going to do with this really thin wire is fold it up to double it in size and twist it. So I have a little bit more wire to work with here, and then it's still long, so I'm going to fold it again to double it again. And now we have a lot more wire to work with there. So I'm going to do the same to the other side. Alright, so now we can actually put connectors and bullshit on this. So next what we're going to do is run our wire from this to our switch. So it's not very far. You only need to go about that far. Always cut a little extra. So you got some wiggle room. You want it to be loose, you don't want it to be pulled stupid tight. So I stripped these wires and I'm twisting the wires together so that they're all bunched up nicely, nice and stiff. And then I'm gonna plug in this heat gun so that I get an extension cord. You can use a lighter or a torch with these. Hell, you don't even have to use these type of butt connectors, but I use these because on ATVs, when you're getting wet and muddy, kind of good to insulate all your electronics and stuff. So I'm gonna fire up this boy and get it preheating. And take our little connector here, and I'm gonna push one end all the way down under the solder. So I can see that it's under the solder. In fact, I'm going to fold it over again just so there's even more copper for it to solder to. So I folded it again, push it in, leave it right under that solder. Actually, do one even better. Push it all the way through. Take your red side and just go ahead and intertwine those a little bit. Twist them together and pull it so that, oh, came undone. You don't want any of the plastic where the solder is. You want all copper where the solder is. So now, that's how it is. Let's see if I can get a closer shot for you guys. So only copper where the solder is, so that way it, you know, melts it. So now I'm going to take and heat my heat shrink. It's going to suck down on the wires first, so it holds them in place. And then I'm going to start heating the solder. You just kind of want to go around it. And it may not look like it's melting, but if you look close, you'll see in there that it is. Alright. She is soldered and sealed up nice and tight. There's glue in this stuff too, so it like glues to the wires. Nice and soldered. Alright, let's get a bigger view and do the next one. We decided to keep this a little bit longer so we can twist those wires together, throw it all the way over the wire. Get that nice and wrapped around. Just like that. Remember to heat the ends first so that it sucks down to the wire and holds on to it so it doesn't pull out on you when you're working on it. And then slowly go back and forth on the solder so it can melt down into the wires. Alright, those are soldered together and heat shrink together and glued on the wires, and you can see the glue squeezed out there on the top. So that's a nice good connection now. So now we have our accessory wired to our switch. So next what we need to do is run some wire from our battery to where our switch is located. We need a ground, or a negative and a positive. So since this battery is kind of far away, we'll measure it out. Give it a little bit more because I'll just reuse this stuff. And alright. So I'm just going to do the same thing, strip these wires, but I'm going to strip these long because they're going to connect to that battery. I'm just going to wrap them on the post there. Alright, so this is going to go around my battery. You don't have to worry about making them this long. I'm just doing it that long for testing purposes. On the other end, which is right here, we are going to do, okay, so the ground needs to go to 2 places. So we need to split the ground twice. And I know this is confusing, but I'll draw it all out for you afterwards and go over the whole thing to make it not as confusing. So what we need is actually wire for our ground. We'll take some of this black side and we'll make 2 strands. And we'll strip those. Alright, so you'll see why we're doing this in a minute. We need these 2 grounds to go into our ground from the battery. So we're going to do the same thing we've been doing. We got our 2 grounds right here. And we have our long ass ground from the battery. So we'll twist these 2 together because they're going to be coming out. We're turning 1 ground from the battery into 2. If you have 3 switches, you're going to need 3 grounds. So you would do 3 of these. If you have 4 switches, 4. If you have 5 switches, 5, and so on and so forth. But your 1 ground from the battery, you need to split off for as many things you're going to do. So keep that in mind when you're setting stuff up. So the blue one can go over 14 gauge by itself pretty good, but for these thicker ones where I'm doing 2 at a time, we're going to go ahead and stick one of these yellow ones on there so it can actually fit over the sleeve and glue onto it and have a nice watertight connection there. And we're going to push it in far enough to where copper is under the solder. That's far enough. So then we'll take our ground from the battery, since we're only wiring up 1 device, where we only need 2 of these, and I'll explain in a second why 2. I'm going to shove it in there. And just do the same thing. Heat the sides first so it grabs wire so it doesn't pull out on you. And then heat the solder. So sometimes it may not look like it's actually melting the solder, but you'll see imprints of the wires come through the solder, and that's how you know. It may not look like it did, but it did. I'm trying to get it to focus. So you'll see that the wire through the solder didn't look like it melted it, but it did. There you go. So now those are ready. So the reason why we have to do 2 wires from the battery if we're only doing 1 device is because we're going to ground the switch and we're going to ground the accessory. So the accessory ground's here, the switch ground is here, so that's why we have 2. Now, can you go without grounding your switch? Yes, you can, but the light will not work. So the ground is literally just for the light. So to recap what we have so far, so we're not getting confused, we've cut a hole out for our switch, which is going to go here. We haven't put it in yet on purpose. We installed our accessory, which is there, and ran the wires. We connected wires so that we could run this wire to a switch. It isn't wired yet, but we've connected wires for that. We've made wires that are going to come off our main power and ground that are going to come off the battery. And we've split one ground into two grounds. And the reason why we did that is because the switch needs a ground to light up and the accessory needs a ground to light up. So let's continue on. Next up, what we're going to do is put one of these grounds on our accessory and the other ground we're going to crimp on a connector to go to our switch. So I'm just going to strip off an edge for our accessory. Strip off one of our edges, or one of our ends for ground. We're going to get a butt connector. It's too tiny. Shove the wires in there so the copper's over the solder. Go ahead and heat her down. Alright, so now we've got power running up, we've got our accessory grounded straight to the battery, and we have a ground ready for the switch. So we need to wire that. Gonna strip that off. You don't need a whole lot for these little guys. And I found that the blue connectors are best for these switches. Now I don't even know if a red one will work. Well, I guess a red one would work. Nope, blue. The reason blue is because of the 14 gauge wire we're using. So keep that in mind as well. We're going to want a nice female connector like that goes onto one of the prongs of the switch. Take your wire, shove it up in there. Nice and firm. Look through and make sure you got some copper showing there. Yeah, you'll see that copper showing through there. And you're going to get your crimping tools, these nice ones I said to get. Lock your thing in there, push on the wire while you're holding it in place, and crimp it. And boom, done. Nice connection. Okay, so that's a ground that's going to go to the switch. Now we need to wire and put two ends on the positive going to our LED light and the positive coming from the battery. So again, if you have 5 switches, you're going to want 5 ends coming off of this main one so you don't have a mess like I do under there. So just keep that in mind. I don't have the battery hooked up right now. Probably something you shouldn't have either hooked up. I always twist my wires so they make a nice firm connection. Dang, I'm gonna have to order more of these blue things. I love these. They are badass. I will have links in the description of everything that I'm using here today. So I'll throw on another cap. One here. Alright, so now we're ready to hook up everything, and the last step is the battery. So what I suggest now is, before you pop your switch in, always do that last. Pretty understandable. Take all your wires, run them through the hole. Now we got our wires through the hole. These 3-prong switches have a gold tab. See that like goldish looking one? That's always your ground. So go ahead and throw your ground on. So now we got our ground on. Now I have to flip this up and remember what is what. So my accessory switch is this one. This one goes to the light strip. The other one is my constant power to the battery. So I'm going to take my constant power and put it on the opposite end of the ground. That's where power in goes. And then in the center you got accessory out. So that goes to your little light bar there, whatever the hell you got going on. So now we can go ahead, squeeze these together, push them through, orient our switch, and pop it into place. So now we got a nice switch. Alright, last thing to do is our battery test. So I'm going to take my power that's ran right here, try her out. Alright, test her out. One of the reasons also why you check your electronics before you go through all the work and installing them. This is a dead strip here on the LED, so the LED is defective, but I just had it laying around in the garage. So there you have it. You got a switch on your yellow flat four-wheeler. Turn off, turn on. Woohoo, good to go. And again, you don't have to run a ground to the switch, but you definitely have to ground that guy. If you don't run a ground to the switch, it will not light up, but it will send power through still. So there you have it, guys. That's how to wire switches and where to run them. Now I got a random bunch of wires on them. Bin top. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed the video. I tried to make it as detailed as possible. Sorry if it seemed long and dragged out. But again, there will be links in the description of all the tools I use here today. And yeah, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.